My name is Evelyn Bauer. I'm 68 years old, and I retired from working as a school secretary just 2 years ago. I live in Springfield, Missouri, in the same small 2-bedroom home my husband and I bought back in 1983. He passed away when our son, Scott, was just 11. Since then, it's been me and Scott against the world. Or at least, that's what I used to think. Before we get into it, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment where you're watching from. Until last week, I had exactly $111,842 saved up in my retirement account. Every penny came from decades of brown bag lunches, skip vacations, and clipping coupons until my fingers cramped. I never made much, but I always planned. I lived within my means. I had dreams, not big ones, just enough to feel safe in my old age. A little condo near the park, a used sedan that wouldn't break down on me. Maybe even a trip to Maine in the fall, just once. That morning, I logged in to check my balance like I do at the start of every month. It had become a little routine. I liked seeing the number there. It gave me comfort. But when the page loaded, my stomach dropped. The account showed a balance of $327. I blinked, thinking I must have clicked the wrong link. I refreshed the page. Still the same. I sat there frozen at the kitchen table. My coffee had gone cold. My heart felt like it had stopped. I clicked through the account history. There it was. A withdrawal. $111,000 gone. Taken in one transaction. 2 days ago. I called the bank immediately, thinking it had to be some kind of error. A hack. A system glitch. The young man on the phone asked me to verify my identity. Then he said, "Mrs. Bauer, according to our records, the withdrawal was made in person at our main branch. The withdrawal slip has your signature on it." My signature? I asked. I haven't been to that branch in over a year. That's not possible. "I understand, ma'am," he said calmly, "but it shows the transaction was processed with ID and the slip was signed." I couldn't breathe. I felt sick. After the call, I just sat there, staring at the wall. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I felt numb. Empty. I thought maybe there had been some mistake. Maybe someone had stolen my purse. Maybe my identity had been used. I started trying to piece it together, but I hadn't lost my wallet. My ID was still in my purse, exactly where it always was. And that's when something started to click. Scott had been over 2 days ago. He said he needed to borrow my car to go pick up a friend. I remember him asking me if I had seen his driver's license. He said he must have left it in the living room. He picked up my keys. He was in and out of the house for a few minutes while I was out back with the dog. It didn't feel like anything at the time, but now I was starting to see it differently. Scott is my only child. I raised him on my own after my husband passed. He had a tough time for a few years, struggled through college, changed jobs more times than I can count. I paid off his credit card debt once. I co-signed on a car for him in his 20s when he said he needed it to keep his job. I helped him and his wife, Gladys, move back to Missouri last year when they said California was too expensive. I let them live in my basement, rent-free. I cooked extra meals. I gave them space. I thought I was being a good mother. I thought I was helping him stand on his feet. I never, not once, imagined he would take from me like this. And yet here I was, looking at an empty account, a forged signature, and the possibility that my own son had drained every dollar I'd worked a lifetime to save. I picked up my phone and called him. No answer. I texted, "Scott, emergency. Call me ASAP." Still nothing. I called again. Voicemail. I sat there for almost an hour, phone in hand, heart pounding. I tried to talk myself out of it. Maybe it was something else. Maybe it was a mix-up. Maybe the bank got it wrong. But the longer I sat, the more I felt it in my bones. This wasn't random. This wasn't a stranger. This had Scott's fingerprints all over it. When I finally stood up, I felt dizzy. My legs were weak. I shuffled over to the window to get some air. And that's when I saw it. A brand new black Dodge Charger parked at the curb. Shiny, flashy, loud. It wasn't there yesterday. And Scott's name was on the insurance paperwork I'd helped him with last week. That's when the truth hit me like a slap across the face. My son spent my retirement savings on that car, and I hadn't even begun to see the worst part yet, because what came next would show me just how far gone he really was, and how deep Gladys had her claws in this too. If you've ever been blindsided by the people you love the most, if you've ever had someone betray your trust in the name of family, then you might understand where this story is going. Because what I did next changed everything. Not just for me, but for them too. And if you're still watching, don't go anywhere. You're going to want to hear how this ends. Looking back now, I can't believe how many little red flags I waved off. Scott and Gladys moved back to Missouri last fall. They said California had chewed them up and spit them out. The rent was too high, the jobs weren't steady, and they were tired of just scraping by. They wanted a fresh start closer to family. And like a fool, I opened my door wide. They didn't have much when they arrived, just a beat-up sedan, a couple of boxes, and big dreams. I cleared out the basement, set up a bed, stocked the fridge, told them it was temporary until they got on their feet. Gladys said they'd only need 3 months tops. That was 9 months ago. Scott said he wanted to start his own business, auto detailing, maybe something mobile. He'd worked at a car lot for a while in Bakersfield and said he'd learned the ropes. I asked him for a plan, what equipment he'd need, how much it would cost. He told me he was still figuring it out. I didn't push. I wanted to believe in him. He'd had such a hard time finding his way. I thought maybe this would be the thing that finally stuck. Gladys got a job at a local boutique 2 days a week. The rest of the time, she was in the kitchen like it was hers, reorganizing my cabinets, rearranging my pantry, buying fancy herbs I couldn't pronounce. She had opinions on everything, from the curtains in my living room to the way I folded laundry. She called it helping, but it never felt like help. She had this way of making me feel like I was the guest in my own house. She once told me, "You should really let go of all this old-fashioned stuff. It makes the place feel stuck." I just smiled and said nothing. One time, Scott asked to borrow my checkbook, said he needed to pay off an unexpected utility bill, and would replace the amount the following week. It was only a couple $100, and he seemed embarrassed to ask. So I gave it to him. He said he'd write it in my name because the account was in his. That was the first time. There were more times after that. Then there was the afternoon I walked into the basement to drop off clean towels. I caught the tail end of a conversation. Scott had his laptop open, and Gladys was saying, "Your mom won't mind. She's retired. She's not even using the money." When they saw me, they both froze. Scott slammed the laptop shut and said they were just talking about taxes. I ignored it. I told myself I was being paranoid. I let so many little things slide. Times when Scott would ask for small amounts just until next week. Times when Gladys used my card to grab groceries and came back with makeup and candles. I didn't say anything. I told myself they were stressed. Starting over was hard. I wanted to believe that they respected me, that they'd never cross a real line. But now that line was so far behind us, I couldn't even see it anymore. After I saw the car in the driveway, I waited until the next morning to bring it up. I thought maybe, just maybe, there was some kind of explanation. That morning, Scott was in the kitchen pouring coffee, like it was any other day. I sat down across from him and said, "Scott, I checked my retirement account yesterday. All the money's gone." He paused, then kept stirring his coffee. I asked, "Did you take it?" He looked me dead in the eye and said, "I needed it for the business. I'm going to make it all back, Mom. You'll be fine." I stared at him. That money was my future, Scott. It was everything I'd saved. He shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. "You always said money's just a tool. This is an investment." I didn't know what to say. Gladys walked in then, still in pajamas, sipping her smoothie. When she realized what we were talking about, she chimed in. "You told us you wanted us to succeed. This is how we do it. You can't just hold all that money and expect us to live in your basement forever." I looked at both of them, stunned. "You didn't even ask me," I said. "We didn't think you'd get it," Scott replied. "You'd have said no. You always play it safe." I stood up. "I want the money back. Every cent." Scott sighed and looked away. Gladys said, "Don't be selfish, Evelyn. You've had your life. It's our turn now." That line hit me hard, like my life was over and theirs was just starting, and I was supposed to hand over the baton with a smile. I left the room shaking, went straight to the bank that afternoon. I sat down with a woman named Cheryl, a customer service manager. I explained the withdrawal and told her it wasn't me. I showed her my ID, my signature, everything. She looked at the records and said, "Well, ma'am, the transaction was done in person. The teller said the woman had ID and the signature matches yours." "But I didn't sign anything," I said. She looked at me gently and said, "I'm sorry, but unless you can prove fraud, we have to treat this as authorized." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. They were saying it didn't matter what I said. The money was gone, and it was treated like I gave it away willingly. I walked out of that bank feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. My own son had taken my retirement. My daughter-in-law thought I owed it to them. And now the bank was telling me it was all legal. But I knew better. And I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. The next morning, I barely slept. I was up before the sun, pacing the kitchen floor, my stomach in knots. I kept waiting to hear Scott come upstairs, but instead, I heard the rumble of the car engine outside. I looked out the window and saw him out there in the driveway, crouched beside the front tire, wiping down the rim of that shiny new Dodge Charger like it was a newborn baby. I walked outside in my slippers. He didn't even look up. "Scott," I said, loud enough for him to hear. "We need to talk." He stood up slowly, set the towel on the hood, and leaned against the car like he was proud of himself. "You saw the account," he said flatly. "I figured you would." "You took everything," I said. My voice was shaking, but I stood as straight as I could. He crossed his arms. "I didn't take it. I used it." "Used it?" I repeated. "That was my retirement, my life savings." Scott didn't flinch. "Mom, I needed a reliable car to launch the business. I'm doing this for us." "No, Scott," I said, staring him down. "You're doing it for yourself. You didn't even ask." He gave a shrug. "I knew you'd say no, but I've got a plan. Mobile detailing. I've already ordered supplies. I'll be back on my feet in 6 months. I stood there in disbelief. "So, you just decided my money was yours to use?" He looked away for a second, then said, "It was just sitting there, Mom. You weren't using it." I opened my mouth to reply, but then Gladys walked out of the house. She had a coffee mug in one hand, her nails freshly done. She was wearing a robe that I hadn't seen before, something silky. "Oh, you're talking about the money," she said, not even hiding it. "Yes," I answered, "and I want it back." Gladys scoffed. "You act like we robbed a bank. We didn't steal it. We redirected it." I stared at her. "Redirected it?" She sipped her coffee. "Scott told you we're starting a business. This is a family investment." I almost laughed. No one asked me if I wanted to invest. Scott stepped forward. You're being too emotional. You have to look at the bigger picture. This is a long-term move. I don't care if it's long-term or short-term. I snapped. That money was mine. You had no right. Gladys rolled her eyes. You'd really rather let us live in the basement forever than help us get out. You'd rather hold on to some savings instead of helping your own son build something. You didn't give me the chance to help, I said. You just help yourselves. Scott leaned back against the car. I'll pay you back. I stared at him. With what? He paused. I pushed on. You haven't had a steady job in 2 years. Gladys works part-time. Where's the money coming from? I said I'll pay you back, he repeated. I folded my arms. I'm calling the bank again. If this isn't resolved, I'll report it. Gladys stepped forward, eyes narrowed. So you'd rather destroy your son's future over a car? My mouth dropped open. He already destroyed my future. She pointed at me. You're just bitter because you think your life is over, and now you don't want anyone else to move forward either. That one hit me in the gut. You have no idea what you're talking about, I said, keeping my voice low. You walk around my house like you own it. You spend my money like it means nothing, and now you're calling me bitter. Scott interrupted. Okay, that's enough. This is getting out of hand. No, Scott, I said, shaking my head. It's been out of hand. You crossed the line. Both of you. Gladys laughed under her breath. Maybe it's time you moved on from all this. Sell the house. Go live in one of those 55-plus places. You'd probably be happier. I looked at her like she was a stranger. Scott looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. I turned to go back into the house. My legs felt heavy, like they belonged to someone else. I heard Gladys say something to Scott, but I didn't care anymore. Inside, I sat down on the edge of my bed and just stared at the floor. For a long time, I couldn't wrap my head around how easy it was for them, how normal they acted, like it wasn't theft, like it was just a small favor I should be happy to give. They didn't apologize. They didn't even pretend to feel bad. It was like I'd stopped being a mother in their eyes and turned into a wallet. I picked up my phone and called the bank again. I asked to speak to someone higher up. I told them I had more to say and that I wasn't letting this go. They said they'd escalate the case and get back to me within 2 business days. I hung up and sat still. The silence in the house felt loud. I'd spent a lifetime being the dependable one, the helper, the giver. Now I was broke, blindsided, and being told to move on. But deep inside me, something started to shift. If they thought I was just going to lie down and accept it, they had no idea who they were dealing with. This time, I was going to fight back. That night, the house felt colder than it had in years. I wrapped myself in an old quilt and sat on the living room couch, staring at nothing. The TV was off. The lights were dim. I could hear the low hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the floors. But nothing else. Just stillness. I looked around at the home I'd built with so much love. Every corner held a memory. The framed school photo of Scott in 2nd grade, missing a front tooth. The lamp that Harold and I bought at a yard sale before he passed. The little ceramic bird on the windowsill. Scott made it for me in 3rd grade. I glued its broken wing back together when he dropped it, told him it was still perfect. Now, I didn't even know who he was anymore. I raised that boy alone. No child support. No help. I worked at Lincoln Elementary for 29 years. I cleaned classrooms after hours when they were short on janitors. I packed lunch from home every single day, while the other staff went out for sandwiches. I said no to new shoes, vacations, and cable TV. I did all of it to make sure Scott had what he needed. I remember one winter I wore the same coat for the 4th year in a row just so he could go on a school trip. He came home with a goofy smile and stories about snow tubing. That made it worth it. Back then, I thought love meant sacrifice. I thought being a good mother was about giving and giving, even when it left you empty. Now I was sitting in that same house, nearly 70 years old, with nothing to show for it but empty savings and a sick feeling in my chest. I reached for my address book and found a number I hadn't dialed in years. Dale Weston, the financial advisor from the school district. He used to come in every quarter to help us understand our pensions. Always kind, always honest. He picked up on the second ring. Dale, it's Evelyn Bauer. I used to work in the front office at Lincoln. Of course. Evelyn, how are you? I hesitated. Not great. I need some advice. I explained what happened. The savings account. The withdrawal, my son, the car, everything. He was quiet for a moment, then said, Evelyn, I'm going to be direct with you. This is fraud. You didn't authorize the withdrawal. They used your name, your information, and forged your signature. You need to report this. I swallowed hard, but it's my son. I understand, he said gently, but that doesn't make it right. He stole from you. If it were anyone else, you'd be calling the police without thinking twice. I didn't say anything. He continued, you worked too hard to let this go. At the very least, talk to the bank's fraud department again. Tell them you want to escalate the case. And you might want to talk to a lawyer too. I thanked him and hung up. My hands were shaking again. I didn't want to believe that I needed to bring the law into this. What kind of mother does that? I sat there for another half hour, torn between heartbreak and disbelief. Then I called someone who always told it like it was, Nadine, my friend from church. She answered on speakerphone while chopping onions for dinner, like always. Hey, Evelyn, everything okay? No, I said, I need to talk. I told her everything. The money, the car, the bank, Scott, Gladys. She didn't interrupt. Just let me talk. When I finished, there was a short silence. Then she said, well, I'll tell you one thing, Evelyn, they don't love you if they can do this to you. That stopped me cold. Nadine, I started. No, listen, she said firmly. I know it hurts, but if someone really loves you, they don't steal from you. They don't lie to your face and then blame you for being upset. That's not love. That's using you. Tears welled up in my eyes. But he's my son. And I've seen mothers walk away from their sons for less. You've done everything for that boy. I remember when you gave up going to your niece's wedding just to help him pay rent. I thought I was helping. I whispered. You were, she said, but he stopped seeing it as help. He started seeing it as something he was owed. I sat in silence, letting her words settle. You're not the villain here, Evelyn. You're the victim. And you need to start protecting yourself. Because clearly they're not going to. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. You come to church Sunday, she added. We'll pray about it. But I also want you to talk to someone who can help. Real help. Legal help. After we hung up, I sat there in the quiet again. But it didn't feel quite as heavy. Not yet light, but not as heavy. I walked over to the thermostat and turned the heat up. The room had gotten chilly again. As I waited for the warm air to kick in, I pulled out a small notebook from the drawer. The one where I used to write down household bills, grocery lists, and savings goals. I turned to a clean page and wrote one word at the top. Boundaries. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do next, but I knew one thing for sure. This time, I wasn't going to let anyone else write the ending of my story. Not even my son. The next morning, I put on my church clothes. Not because I was going anywhere fancy, but because I needed to feel like myself again. I needed to look like someone who hadn't been broken. Someone who hadn't just had their life savings stolen. I drove back to the bank, hands tight around the wheel. I didn't want to be emotional. I didn't want to cry or stammer. I wanted answers. At the front desk, I asked to speak with a manager. They gave me a card and sent me to a small office in the back. A man named Philip greeted me, maybe in his late 30s, dressed sharp with glasses and a polite smile. I introduced myself and told him exactly why I was there. I'm Evelyn Bauer. I'm here about a withdrawal that happened 2 weeks ago. It wasn't me, and I want to see the security footage. He didn't argue. He pulled up a file on his computer and clicked through a few folders. Then he turned the screen toward me. There, he said, that's the day in question. I leaned in. It was Scott, wearing one of my old jackets from the closet, hair slicked back. He had glasses on, my reading glasses, I think. In his hand was my driver's license. I watched as he handed it to the teller, smiled, and scribbled something on a form. The teller nodded, punched something into the computer, then handed over a cashier's check. Philip paused the video. "That's your son?" he asked gently. I nodded. My mouth was dry. He looked at me with a bit of discomfort. The teller said she recognized him as part of your family, which is why she processed it despite the fact he didn't know the PIN for large withdrawals. So she knew it wasn't me, I said, trying to stay calm. And she let it go through anyway? Philip hesitated. She made a judgment call. One we'll need to review. But I have to be honest, Mrs. Bauer, because he presented a valid ID and a matching signature. The system flagged it as authorized. I didn't authorize anything. I said, "That's not my signature. It's close, but it's not mine." He nodded. "We'll escalate this to the fraud department for review. It'll take a few business days, but I'll personally follow up. In the meantime, I recommend freezing all your accounts, just to be safe." I agreed and signed the necessary papers. When I got back to my car, I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, staring at the dashboard. I just watched my son pretend to be me, sign my name, take every penny I'd saved. And now I had to wait for someone else to decide whether it even counted as a crime. That night, Nadine came by with dinner, baked chicken, green beans, and a little sweet potato casserole. She sat with me in the kitchen while I told her what I'd seen. She didn't say much at first, just listened. When I was done, she said, "That boy's lucky I'm not the one holding the law books." Then she reached into her purse and handed me a business card. "Call her," she said, "my daughter Trina. She works for a law office in town. She's not a lawyer, but she knows who to talk to. She'll get you a consultation with someone who knows what they're doing." I stared at the card for a long time. I'd never needed a lawyer before. The next day, I made the call. Trina picked up and listened carefully. I already heard from my mom. She said, "You don't need to explain everything again. Just come by tomorrow morning. I'll set it up." At 9 a.m. sharp, I walked into a small office above a bakery downtown. The smell of fresh bread followed me up the stairs. The place wasn't fancy, just a few desks, some shelves of legal books, and a potted plant that had seen better days. The lawyer, Daniel Pryor, was in his late 40s, kind but no nonsense. I told him my story, every bit of it. He didn't interrupt, didn't look at his watch, just listened. When I finished, he leaned back and said, "You've got a case." I exhaled for the first time in days. "We'll start with a demand letter," he said, "sent to both your son and daughter-in-law. We'll also notify the dealership and request a hold on the vehicle title. If they don't respond, we'll move forward with a formal fraud claim and possibly press charges for identity theft." I nodded. It sounded overwhelming, but I didn't feel scared. I felt ready. He continued, "I'll need a few documents. Bank statements, the video footage if the bank provides it, and any text messages between you and your son that might help show what happened." "I have those," I said. "Good. And Evelyn," he added, You have every right to do this. Don't let guilt stop you. This isn't about punishing him. It's about protecting yourself. That night, I sat at my dining table, reviewing old checkbook entries, pulling out printed statements, highlighting messages from Scott that now looked so different under the light of truth. One in particular stood out. "Don't worry, Mom. I'll make it all work out. Just trust me." I'd trusted him, and he'd cashed it in like a blank check. By the end of the night, the demand letter was drafted and ready to go out. I read it twice. Simple, clear, professional. Return the full amount or face legal action. This was the first time in my life I'd ever stood up to Scott. Really stood up. It wasn't about being angry anymore. It wasn't even just about the money. It was about respect. And I was done letting that be something he got to take. 3 days after I signed the paperwork at Daniel's office, the legal notices went out. One to Scott, one to Gladys, one to the dealership that sold them the Dodge Charger. All certified mail, all by the book. By the end of the week, the silence broke. Scott called me first. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail instead. His voice was shaking with anger. "I can't believe you do this to your own son. You're seriously trying to ruin me? Over a car? What kind of mother are you?" That was just the beginning. The next day, I got a text from Gladys. "Wow, you really are toxic. We tried to include you in our life. Now look what you're doing. Hope you enjoy being alone." Then she posted some long paragraph on her Facebook page. I don't use it much, but Nadine saw it and sent me a screenshot. It was filled with half-truths and some outright lies. She's bitter, controlling, and jealous. We tried to build something for our future, and she couldn't handle it. Some people can't stand to see you doing better than them. I stared at the screen for a long time, not because I believed it, but because I couldn't believe how quickly I'd been turned into the villain. And it didn't stop there. Over the next week, I started getting phone calls I hadn't gotten in years. Scott's uncle Raymond called. We hadn't spoken in over a decade. "Evelyn, I don't want to get in the middle, but maybe you should just talk it out with Scott. Family stuff gets messy." Then his cousin Lisa called, saying, "Is this really worth tearing the family apart?" Funny how none of these people had called when I turned 65 or when I retired, but now they had opinions. Each call chipped away at me. I started to question myself. Was I really overreacting? Was I being too harsh? But every time I logged into my empty retirement account, I remembered exactly why I was doing this. Then the dealership responded. Daniel called me personally. "They're cooperating," he said. Once they saw the legal paperwork and realized the funds were obtained fraudulently, they flagged the car. The title can't be transferred or resold. Scott wouldn't be able to register the car, couldn't sell it, couldn't trade it. As far as the law was concerned, it was a stolen vehicle bought with stolen money. 2 days later, the dealership's legal team sent a letter. They requested the car be returned or risk repossession, and they'd be pursuing Scott for the remaining balance since the loan had already been processed. The bubble had burst. I didn't hear from Scott directly after that, but a friend of his, someone he used to go to school with, called me out of nowhere. "Miss Bauer, this is Jason. We went to high school together. I just wanted you to know, Scott came to me asking for help. Told me you took legal action over some business disagreement. But once I heard what really happened, I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, and good for you." That call shook something loose inside me, because for the first time, someone didn't treat me like the problem. Over the next few days, more people reached out. Mrs. Langley, a retired teacher I worked with at the elementary school, left me a voicemail. "Heard what happened. Just want you to know I believe you, and you're doing the right thing. That kind of betrayal isn't just money, it's personal." My neighbor 2 doors down, Margaret, dropped off a pie and said, "You're braver than most people. Some folks go their whole lives letting their kids walk all over them. Little by little, I started to feel human again. I went for a walk down the block. The air felt different, lighter. A man walking his dog nodded at me and said, "You're Evelyn, right? The one who stood up to her kid. Respect." Word had spread, sure, but so had something else. Support. And it meant more to me than I ever expected. Meanwhile, Scott's so-called business was falling apart. With the car flagged and his supplies sitting unpaid for, there wasn't much he could do. I heard through a neighbor's cousin that he'd been trying to book clients, but no one wanted to work with someone involved in a fraud case. Gladys went back to working full-time at the boutique, and from what I heard, she was none too pleased about it. I didn't celebrate any of it. I didn't gloat. But I won't lie, I felt a kind of peace knowing consequences had finally caught up to them. One night, I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping a cup of tea, when Nadine came over again. She brought a little notebook and said, "I want to help you make a new plan." "A new plan?" I asked. "Yep, because once you get that money back, and you're going to do something for yourself." We wrote down things I'd once pushed to the side. Drive to the Ozarks in the fall. Sign up for a watercolor class. Host a Sunday brunch without asking anyone's permission. We even looked up condos near the park. I wasn't there yet, but I could see it now. A different kind of future. And this time, it would be one no one else could steal. It took almost 4 weeks, but the bank finally called me back. I was sitting on the porch drinking my morning coffee when the call came in. It was Philip, the same manager who showed me the footage of Scott at the counter. "Mrs. Bauer," he said, "after our review, we've determined that our teller failed to follow verification protocols. The account had a large withdrawal safeguard, and that safeguard was bypassed without proper identification. We take full responsibility." I sat there quietly, waiting for him to finish. "We'll be reimbursing the full amount, $111,000. It'll be deposited into a new secure account under your name." I didn't speak right away. I just felt my shoulders drop, like I'd been carrying a weight for months, and suddenly someone lifted it off. I thanked him and hung up. Then I just sat there, letting it settle. The money was coming back, but the person I had to become to get here, that part didn't feel like a win. It felt more like survival. Around that same time, I heard through the grapevine that Scott and Gladys had been evicted. The dealership had officially reclaimed the car after they defaulted on the loan. The detailing business never got off the ground, and without the car, there was nothing left to even pretend. They'd moved out of the basement weeks ago. We hadn't spoken since the legal notices went out. Last I heard, they were staying with someone Gladys knew from her old job. But it was short-term and strained. I didn't feel guilty. Not anymore. For a while, I thought I would. I thought I'd wrestle with guilt, wonder if I'd gone too far, if I should have handled things quietly. But the more time passed, the clearer it became. I didn't ruin anything. They did. Still, I couldn't ignore how deeply it had all shaken me. The betrayal, the silence, the family ties that now felt like loose string. Nadine gave me a flyer one Sunday after service. It was for a local support group, people who had gone through something called financial elder abuse. I never even knew there was a name for it, but I went. The first meeting was in the back room of the public library. About a dozen people, mostly women, a few men. Some older than me, some younger. Everyone had a story. One woman shared how her daughter had taken out credit cards in her name. Another man said his nephew convinced him to sell his house, and then left him living in a camper. Every story chipped away at the shame I'd been holding. Because I wasn't alone. I wasn't stupid. I wasn't soft. I was just a mother who trusted her child. That group became a small lifeline. I started going weekly. I listened. I shared. I healed. With the money returned, I sat down with Daniel, the lawyer, and we talked about next steps. He asked if I wanted to pursue charges against Scott. I thought about it, really thought about it, but I said no, not because I forgave him, but because I was tired of fighting, tired of being angry. I had my money back. That was enough. It was time to do something for me. I sold the old house, quietly, no big announcements, no farewell party. It was too full of memories. Some good, yes, but also heavy ones. And I needed a clean start. I bought a modest condo in a senior-friendly community just a few miles away. 2 bedrooms, single level, no stairs. It had a small garden patch and a screened-in porch. I didn't need much more. The first night I slept there, I didn't dream. I just rested. Deep, quiet rest. I started walking every morning, joined a book club at the community center. I even signed up for a basic painting class on Thursday afternoons. I smiled more, laughed a little, sat in silence without feeling haunted. One afternoon, I got a text from an unknown number. It was Gladys. I hope you're happy. You tore this family apart. I hope you enjoy being alone with your money. I stared at it for a moment, read it twice. Then I deleted it. No reply. What was there to say? I hadn't torn anything apart. I just finally stopped pretending the pieces still fit. I didn't hate them. Not anymore. But I didn't owe them my peace either. Some days were still quiet. Some nights I still thought about how things used to be. The little boy who gave me Mother's Day cards made from construction paper and glue sticks. The way I used to believe I could protect him from everything, including himself. But life doesn't always give you neat endings. Sometimes the best you get is a second chance at your own beginning. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't living for anyone else. Not as a mother, not as a caregiver, just Evelyn. And that was enough. It's been 7 months since everything happened. 7 months since the bank called and gave me my money back. 7 months since I moved out of the house where I raised my son and poured my life into that yard, those walls, those memories. And today, I hosted my very first brunch in my new place. Just a few people, Nadine, Daniel the lawyer, a couple of women from my support group, and my neighbor Sylvia from across the hall. Nothing fancy. I made deviled eggs, some biscuits, and a fruit salad. Nadine brought iced tea. Sylvia showed up with a lemon pie and said she didn't trust store-bought crusts. We laughed. We talked about nothing and everything. No one brought up Scott. No one asked about the fallout or the lawsuit. It was like I had a life that existed outside of being somebody's mother. And I liked it. After they left, and I finished the dishes, I stepped out onto the balcony with a cup of tea and my notebook, the same one where I wrote the word boundaries back when I didn't know what the next day would bring. The sun was warm. The air smelled like cut grass and someone grilling a little too early for dinner. I opened the notebook and flipped through the pages, some filled with budgeting lists, others with little prayers, memories, and bits of what I guess you could call poems. That's when I remembered the letter. A few days earlier, I'd received a plain envelope in the mail. No return address, just my name in handwriting I knew like my own. It was from Scott. I hadn't opened it at first. I wasn't sure I wanted to, but that morning I did. It was short, 1 page, written in pen. He didn't say, Mom, just Evelyn. He said he was sorry, but not in the way I had hoped. He apologized for how things had turned out, not for what he'd done. Said he didn't realize how serious things would get, that he'd been trying to fix things, and felt like I gave up on him too fast. He asked if I ever thought we'd speak again. I folded the letter and set it aside. I didn't write back. Maybe someday I will. Maybe not. The truth is, forgiveness isn't always a moment. Sometimes it's a long process. And sometimes it's not even about the other person. It's about making peace with yourself. I've spent most of my life trying to be the strong one, the dependable one. I said yes when I wanted to say no. I gave when I was tired. I put others first, not because I didn't matter, but because I thought that's what love was. It took losing everything I'd saved to realize I had never once really saved something for me. Not just money, but time, energy, space, voice. Now, I have all of those things. Not in huge amounts, but in the ways that count. I planted a little herb garden on the balcony. Basil, mint, a sad-looking rosemary that refuses to die. I read more. I write a little. I take walks without telling anyone where I'm going or when I'll be back. It's freedom. A quiet kind. The kind that doesn't need to be loud to be real. I still think about Scott. I still wonder what would have happened if he'd just asked instead of taking. If he'd come to me with his struggles instead of hiding them behind lies and plans that never had roots. But those thoughts don't keep me up at night anymore. I don't feel bitter. Just older, wiser, a little lighter. Before I close this chapter, I want to say something to anyone watching who's been through something like this. Has someone you loved ever taken advantage of your trust? Have you felt that sting, that deep ache? Not just from what they took, but from realizing you were never seen the way you thought you were? If so, you're not alone. What helped me wasn't just the law or the bank or the support group. It was making the decision to value myself again, to stop apologizing for having boundaries, to stop explaining why I deserve peace. If you're watching this and something in my story sounds familiar, I hope you know you don't have to stay silent. You don't have to wait for permission to protect what's yours, your money, your time, your heart. You can draw the line. You can start over. And you don't have to do it alone. Share your story in the comments below if you feel ready. Let others know they're not the only ones. If this video meant something to you, please like it, share it, and don't forget to subscribe. There are so many of us out there quietly carrying things we were never meant to carry alone. And maybe, just maybe, telling the truth, your truth, is the first step to letting go. Thanks for listening.